Hello and welcome to the June edition of the Austin Software Cooperatives Meetup Group. We are reviewing the book Mutual Aid, A Factor in Evolution by Peter Kropotkin. We're going to be going over our usual way with mind maps, and hopefully you enjoy it. You know? Okay, so an overview of the book. So this book is kind of an extension. You can maybe even call it a rebuttal to the concept of social Darwinism. So the idea that it's kind of socially, humans, the way they work is almost like war. It's a competition and survival of the fittest. This book says not only do the humans cooperate, which is what we are interested in the cooperative group, but also the animals cooperate as well. And it tries to trace some of that back to Charles Darwin, saying that people misrepresent him. So it's really countervailing forces. You have on one side survival of the fittest, and you have on the other side mutual aid. So any questions about the book or comments at all so far? All right. So the author tries to trace debates and essays and presentations that happened around the time of Charles Darwin and after, with the concept of mutual aid. There was one zoologist named Kessler that was preoccupied with mutual struggle and mutual aid. So here, Kessler's idea was, besides the law of mutual struggle, there is in nature the law of mutual aid, which for the success of the struggle for life, and especially for the progressive evolution of the species, is far more important than the law of mutual contest. I want to say the author is saying it's just as important, but there are people out there who say it's more important. So one thing that you might, through intuition, you might be thinking about is the humans somehow, because they're more rational, and then so there's kind of an intuition of morality and ethics that might kind of emerge or supervene above anything to do with instincts. And then you have on the other side more of a rational, doing things in the self-interest side. The author here is saying, so as far as this like ethics, and you could use the concept of love, that maybe that's the driver, or is it going to be something kind of instinctual or rational? And there's even a kind of a paradox there. But the author is saying that mutual aid is actually, in a way, a more advanced self-interest. So here, it's not to love my neighbor, whom I often do not know at all, which induces me to seize the pail of water and rush towards his house when I see it on fire. It is a far wider, even though more vague feeling of instinct human solidarity and sociability which moved me. So I'm saying that really it's the instinct of some type of cooperation, he's saying solidarity and sociability, that is the driver. There's a feeling of infinitely wild, it is a feeling infinitely wider than love or personal sympathy, an instinct that has been slowly developed among animals and humans in the course of extremely long evolution, and which has taught animals and humans alike the force they can borrow from the practice of mutual aid and support and the joys they can find in social life. So this is kind of leveling an argument, setting the stage for an argument against social Darwinism, which is and the idea that the best ideas or the best people, concepts, groups, or whatever are going to rise to the top based on competition. This is trying to say that no, even animals have mutual aid. But is not love and even sympathy upon which society is based. Mankind is the conscience, because only at the stage of instinct of human solidarity. So for primitive man, they maintain war of each install was the law of life, in how this assertion, which has been too willingly repeated without sufficient criticism since the time of Hobbes. So Hobbes is a political philosopher who said that humans are, in the what they call the state of nature, so in the base, lowest level, humans are fighting each other. This is an argument against that. So, any questions so far, or any comments so far?
There's something I had seen. It was a psychological study of infants that's related to this, and it was talking about how they would help each other and try to help other people without being prompted. Like they're not saying anything other behavior, but they just start doing it. And there's a whole, it has to do with like socialization is part of it, but there was these other things that kind of relate back to these same wordings. So it goes along with the instincts that you're pointing out here. This seems to be more of like a sociology aspect versus the psychology of individuals, but I think it's related.
Sounds related. All of this stuff is controversial because I think it's kind of accepted now that social Darwinism, sociologists don't really accept social Darwinism. So kind of a thing where saying the humans are not predictable, they don't act rationally, but they don't act based off instinct, and they're just a totally different class of whatever. But so this is an interesting thing to revisit. Just based on an argument that, well, there is some type of instinct of cooperation that's there. If there's something else that supervenes on top of it, fine. But there's a more base piece. So I think there's something there. Okay, so let's go. As far as the book, how it goes, how it's laid out, it tries to find cooperation in animals, and then what he calls savages. So this book was written a long time ago, and so there's all kinds of dated language in the book that can easily be offended by. But so you have savages, barbarians, and the medieval side. So we're going to try to get through some of this. So really, he's referencing, because he himself, I guess, at the time, maybe he used the term biologist, he thought that the authority would be a zoologist at the time. So people who were studying animals, and he would reference them. One of them is Kessler, and how they would talk about cooperation. And so that's what this first part is about, and then also about Darwin. So he's talking about, Darwin. He says in one concept, it's all struggle, survival of the fittest. And a book that he uses, or that he references, is The Descent of Man. Right? But there is again, this countervailing concept that is overlooked, which the author he's really preoccupied with, that even Charles Darwin would say that there's some type of cooperation. So in Descent of Man, he gave some powerful pages to illustrate its proper wide sense. He pointed out how in numberless animal societies, the struggle between separate individuals for the means of existence disappears, and how struggle is replaced by cooperation, and how that substitution results in the development of intellectual and moral faculties, which secure to the species the best conditions for survival. That's revisited throughout the book. That it's really in our best interest to cooperate. So that's what emerges, really. Trying to say. So he intimated that such cases, the fittest are not the physically strongest nor the cunningest, but those who learn to combine so as mutually to support each other, strong and weak alike, for the welfare of the community. Look at some of the examples that he has. So, okay, so we've got Charles Huxley, which he is like the really vocal side of Charles Darwin. And he was, some people attribute social Darwinism to Huxley as well. So it says here, Huxley's view of nature had as little claim to be taken as scientific deduction as the opposite view of Rousseau. Rousseau is another philosopher, or I'd say Rousseau is a philosopher whose argument was that in the state of nature, right, which is referring to Hobbes, in the state of nature, the humans actually were more cooperative. But the author critiques Rousseau by saying that, well, we're going to get into that. He's going to say it here. So let's finish. So Rousseau, who saw in nature but love, peace, harmony destroyed by the ascension of man. Rousseau had committed the error of excluding the beacon claw fight from his thoughts, and Huxley committed the opposite error, but neither Rousseau's optimism nor Huxley's pessimism can be accepted as an impartial interpretation of nature. So he was saying more Rousseau's probably not scientific enough, really not using the observations of animals, and he really wasn't preoccupied with animals, he was preoccupied with humans for his argument. So he's really just being optimistic. He's trying to kind of split the difference here. And he's saying, let's look at a couple examples. Okay, so we have Kessler. Again, I obviously do not deny the struggle for existence, but I maintain that the progressive development of the animal kingdom, and especially of mankind, is favored much more by mutual support than by mutual struggle. All organic beings have two essential needs, that of nutrition and that of propagating the species. The former brings them to struggle and to mutual extermination. while the needs of maintaining the species brings them to approach one another and to support one another. So that's Kessler. And see here. So yeah. All right. So we're gonna. I'll try to abstract some of this. Yeah, the concept of a falcon. Falcons will go and steal, I guess, steal food, fight birds, all kinds of things like that. And it's more on the side of the struggle. And you have another bird, let's say a duck, and it's referenced here somewhere. But through other devices, mutual aid and other things, it can, like what it says, almost invade the earth. And so there's so many of them, and it's kind of a, well, why is that the case? Because ducks are not, uh, they're not hawk-like. They don't fight. So what is that all about? Ants have a all kinds of cooperative styles. One of them is that ants will feed each other from the same colony, depending on if they need it. And then there's other stages of ants and even bees where there's some type of confrontation, they're going to fight, but they try to avoid confrontation, competition, and war and fighting as much as possible in order to, and this is one of the themes in the book, in order to kind of be more efficient. So that's where mutual aid, the reason why mutual aid is better or superior, which was Kessler and really kind of the author, is because it's more efficient in the end. And the way that's more efficient is that it avoids war, which is costly. In the long run, the practice of solidarity proves much more advantageous to the species than the development of individuals endowed with predatory inclinations. Right? So he's got examples from bees where, okay, let's read this. So, centuries would guard the entrance to the hive, pitifully put to death the robbing bees, which attempt entering the hive, but those stranger bees which come into the hive by mistake are left unmolested, especially if they come laden with pollen or are young individuals which can easily go astray. There's no more warfare than is strictly required. Let's say for the ant, if an ant which has its crop full has been selfish enough to refuse feeding a comrade, which the ants, like I said, they feed each other, it will be treated as an enemy. So if they doesn't feed each other, there's a repercussion. Or even worse, if the refusal has been made while its kinsfolk were fighting with some other species, they will fall back upon the greedy individual with a greater vehemence than even upon the enemies themselves. And if an ant has not refused to feed another ant belonging to the enemy species, it will be treated by the kinsfolk of the latter as a friend. Right? So ants can turn into friends of other colonies. Any questions so far? Comments? All right, so we're going to build the argument a little bit here. Nature is variety itself, offering all possible varieties of characters from the basest to the highest, and that is why she cannot be depicted by any sweeping assertion. Still less can she be judged from the moralist point of view, because the views of the moralist are themselves a result, mostly unconscious, of the observation of nature. So again, saying that ethics ride on top of some instinct of mutual aid argument there. here. Got examples from dogs. Dogs hunt in packs. Wolves help hunt in packs. You know about that. Compassion is a necessary outcome of social life, but compassion also means a considerable advance in general intelligence and sensibility. It is the first step towards the development of higher moral sentiments. It is, in its turn, a powerful factor of further evolution. I want to say he's saying compassion rides on top of this instinct. Okay, so here's where we get into more of the argument of or trying to oppose these two forces. So no naturalist will doubt the idea of a struggle for life carried on through organic nature is the greatest generalization of our century. Life is struggle, and in that struggle, the fittest survive. But the answers to the questions by which arms is the struggle chiefly carried on, and who are the fittest in the struggle, will widely differ according to the importance given to the two different aspects of the struggle, the direct one for food and safety among separate individuals, and the struggle which Darwin described as metaphorical, the struggle often collective against adverse circumstances. So when he says often collective, that's the mutual aid portion. Okay, yeah. So when we're talking about ducks, in some cases, no doubt there's actual war between the two, the stronger killing the weaker, but this is by no means necessary. And there may be cases in which the weaker species physically may prevail by its power of more rapid multiplication. It's better withstanding the vicissitudes of climate or its greater cunning in escaping the attacks of common enemies. All right, so there's a interesting position in the book where it says that the idea that survival of the fittest and that there's some type of war that happens between two species or so on and so forth, it's kind of, it doesn't happen anywhere near as much as what with animals or with humans, anywhere near as much as what we think. And it's saying that okay, and let's use this right here. It is known for a long time Darwin was worried about the difficulty which he saw in the absence of a long chain of intermediate forms between closely allied species, and that he found the solution of this difficulty in the supposed extermination of the intermediate forms. So that extermination is that there isn't as many intermediate forms as what you would, going from one species that's evolving into another. Why isn't there a bunch? And he was saying that there is an extermination. So through struggle, it happened. Now, the author's saying that extermination, what we said earlier, was metaphor. He's saying that was metaphorical. Well, what did he mean by extermination? So he offers an answer in saying that a species can migrate, and when they migrate, or maybe they're forced to migrate, and so it could be that there are other things that are not, like when we go look at fossils, like how come we don't see a bunch of them that have been in a war and they got killed off? Well, it could be that as far as survival of the fittest, we're thinking of the species fighting each other. They're offering what he said earlier, adaptations to environment. So migration from one place to another, and they're able to adapt to the environment better versus another group. Right. So he uses later on like concepts of like ice age and all that stuff for humans, all kinds of things like that. And so that's really where he's saying that if you were to go to a new environment, it could be that mutual aid in order to adapt to the environment. So sharing resources, that could be an advantage or will be an advantage over a more what he's calling a predatory, instinctual, animal. So trying to take it, maybe thinking about cooperatives or business in general, there's a book called The Blue Ocean Strategy, which takes a position that says that you shouldn't be trying to compete with other people, other groups, other businesses, what have you. You should be trying to find, like what this author is saying, migration. You should be trying new places completely, new markets, and don't try to stay in an existing market and create a barrier to entry, which is a traditional strategy, but find something brand new, they call it blue ocean, and go there now. But it's going to be on you to adapt better. And then what's interesting within this book, it's saying that the capacity to adapt is more, relies more on cooperation than the capacity to compete. So natural selection continuously seeks out the ways precisely for avoiding competition as much as possible.
There it is.
So that's
That was
counter
making
to
me.
it.
I was thinking of. I think it's called stotting, or whatever. When the prey is signaling to not chase to the predator.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots of different things like that happening.
Yep. Yeah, and that's across species. So yeah, a good example. What Taylor's talking about is you can have a deer that signals, like if you've ever seen a deer and other zebras do it, other animals do it, but they'll jump straight up in the air while, let's say, a predator comes, and biologists were confounded by that. Like, why are they jumping straight up in the air? They are actually running slower when they jump straight up in the air at the beginning of the chase. And so it could be a warning. No, they do it when they're all by themselves. So, it could be some type of vestigial limbs type of thing or something like, oh, maybe they're going to do it regardless of if it's a warning or not. But the theory of animal signals, John Maynard Smith is kind of like the proponent of the animal signals, says that the signal has to be, there's a kind of a weird cooperation between, say, a zebra and a lion, where they're doing the stotting, the jumping straight up, and it is a cooperation. It has to be, and it's saying that I have fitness. It's worthless for you to chase me right now. So, let's not, and say we did, kind of, let's just not even do it at all. So, yeah, it's a form of cooperation, is exactly what Taylor was saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Another thing I was noticing was it seems like behind what he's trying to communicate, there's a lot of I guess our culture has taken the the idea of survival of the fittest must mean aggression and attacking and all this other stuff, when that's not what it means. And the biological meaning of fitness and all of it's just very different from, I think, the common knowledge. And I wonder how much was intentionally um, communicated differently than what Darwin actually meant. Because there's nothing in survival of the fittest or natural selection that communicates that it couldn't be the mutual aid, just like with the example with the weaker.
Yeah.
When weaker,
Well, he
is
even
when
has,
we're talking about physical and not regarding all the other things. From a
yeah,
biological
he,
standpoint, all that matters is who produces more and this makes the species goes on. That's it.
this I want to say is a Darwin quote. I forgot. I didn't include his name. But he quotes Darwin, saying that even Darwin was saying there's this concept of mutual aid. It's just that people didn't concentrate on it later. But yeah, all right, go on. The savages. This is chapter is important because we're going to talk about Hobbes. Though a good deal of warfare goes on between different classes of animals and different species or different tribes of the same species, peace and mutual support are the rule within the tribe or the species, and that those species which best know how to combine and to avoid competition have the best chances of survival and of further progressive development. They prosper while the unsociable species decay. So, one thing about kind of this reoccurring thing, the mutual aid, one of the arguments, a more modern argument is, or a position, is that the survival of the fittest is based on genes and not the species, and gene reproduction and affinity to other genes. So it says something along the lines of, or the position is something along the lines of, even if your genes aren't exactly the same, if there's how much I want to cooperate with you is how close my genes are to yours. So that they would say there's kinship, which is, oh, we're from the same, ancestors kind of, or parents or what have you. But then it's like there's like a genes themselves, even if you are a different breed or species or whatever, I'm just going to cooperate with you more because you're going to reproduce something closer to me. And in as much as, that's not in this book, but in as much as you are not close to my genes, that's altruism. So I really get nothing when you're far away from me, or let's just say it's on a gradient, it's on a scale, continuum. If you're far away, your genes are far away from mine, and I do something to help you. So if you see a lion raising a deer or something like that, that's altruism. And there's all kinds of weird things like that that happen in the animal kingdom. And he references some of those across species. And so that would be kind of a more modern kind of splitting the difference with this. Let's talk about Hobbes. Hobbes took the position while some of his 18th century followers endeavored to prove that no such epoch of its existence, not even in its most primitive conditions, mankind lived in a state of perpetual warfare. So Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes, philosopher, again, he was saying that state of nature, everybody's fighting each other. And then he has a book, Leviathan, and the concept of Leviathan, of the government comes in and it is the force that allows you to feel safe because it handles the warfare for you between your neighbors and between outside of we call the state. But the idea is that there's perpetual warfare in the state of nature. And then the author's trying to say, no, that's not. So here, that humans have been sociable even in the state of nature, and that want of knowledge rather than natural bad inclinations brought humanity to all the horrors of its early historical life. His idea was, on the contrary, that the so-called state of nature was nothing but a permanent fight between individuals accidentally huddled together by the mere caprice of their bestial existence. So it was, Hobbes doesn't even allow in the state of nature that there's groups. It's all individuals. And if you can just imagine, you have your little cave or something, and someone else is coming in your cave to steal something and do something to you, and you have to fight them and you have to get revenge against them and all this stuff like that. And then that's everybody's that way. Authors saying, no, not even animals were doing that, but as the rule. So he's trying to say that Hobbes and followers of Hobbes are, it's a fantasy. But the Hobbesian philosophy has plenty of admirers still, and we have had of late quite a school of writers who, taking possession of Darwin's terminology rather than his leading ideas, made it an argument in favor of Hobbes' views upon primitive man, and even succeeded in giving them a scientific appearance. Huxley, as is known, took the lead of that school, and in a paper written 1888, he presented primitive humans as a sort of tigers or lions deprived of all ethical conceptions, fighting out the struggle for existence to its bitter end, and living a life of continual free fight, to quote his own words, beyond the limited and temporary relations of the family. The Hobbesian war of each against all was the normal state of existence. Right? So you've got Huxley, like I said, they call it social Darwinism, but you can call it Huxleyism, because the position is that Darwin actually didn't say that it was a social thing. Like he was trying to leave everything he was saying at the level of animals and stuff. And then you've got Rousseau on the other side saying, no. Unbridled individualism is a modern growth, but is not characteristic of primitive mankind. And when first meeting with primitive races, the Europeans usually make a caricature of their life. But when an intelligent man has stayed among them for a longer time, he generally describes them as the kindest or the gentlest race on earth. Right? So this is a concept of what's called the noble savage. So saying that if you, and this is a Rousseau thing, another philosopher, if you were to go among, say, Native Americans, or here we're going to say Eskimos, Inuit, really, and there's another name in here for another group, you would see not this, mutual struggle, strife, people going in each other's caves and doing and stealing stuff and fighting. You would see more of some type of cooperation. So it goes against what Hobbes is saying. Eskimo life is based on communism. What is obtained by hunting and fishing belongs to the clan. But in several tribes, especially in the West, under the influence of the Danes, private property penetrates into their institutions. So this is again this is borrowing from Rousseau, saying, well, it was the West that came in and disturbed stuff, and now people have this concept of property. This is kind of a reoccurring theme in the book. This concept of property starts making people want to fight more, something like that. So this is all, I don't know how you pronounce this, Aleut, but this is a kind of, they're not into it. There's something else, but their, I guess, old name would be Eskimo. It is considered shameful for them. So this is a description of their cooperation. It's considered shameful to be afraid of unavoidable death, to ask pardon from an enemy, to die without ever having killed an enemy, to be convicted of stealing, to capsize a boat in the harbor. That's funny. To be afraid of going to sea in stormy weather, to be first in the party on a long journey, to become an invalid in case of a scarcity of food, to show greediness when spoils divided. So there's a bunch of stuff here that go with the group. And the reoccurring theme is that it's kind of a public scorn or public humiliation or critique that was the motivator for these, what he's calling savages. Savages, I think, is everybody after the Romans or something, or before the Romans. Right? Okay, so this was, I found this to be, I thought this was interesting. So he's kind of opposing what he's calling savages with the West, a West European. And so West European are saying, you all are doing some things that just seem really primitive. But the author is saying that, well, they thought West were doing things that were really odd. So let's see this. Western European men of science, when coming across these facts, are absolutely unable to stand them. They cannot reconcile them with a high development of tribal morality. They prefer to cast a doubt upon the exactitude of absolutely reliable observers, instead of trying to explain the parallel existence of two sets of facts: a high tribal morality together with an abandonment of the parents and infanticide. So those were things that were happening that they were observing. Like, okay, I'm seeing infanticide and I'm seeing abandonment of parents and things of the parents of kids. But these same Europeans were to tell a savage that people extremely amiable, fond of their own children, and so impressionable that they cry when they see a misfortune simulated on stage, are living in Europe with a stone's throw from the dens of which children die from sheer want of food. The savage, too, would not understand them. So saying that if you were to go to Europe and it was like a Charles Dickens novel or something where it's, okay, kids are starving to death and all this stuff like that, savages in quotes, they're nobody starves to death. And he has examples of different groups where it's communal. When they come back with the food, everybody eats, that kind of thing. So they would think it's bizarre. So he talks a bit about tribes and kind of the federation of tribes. And then, so we're going to see the emergence of different kinds of laws that supervene on groups when they combine. And we're going to get to that probably in the barbarian. So any questions? You got about 10 minutes. The barbarians. I didn't know that a savage was different than a barbarian. But now we know. I guess. When we come to observe the savages whose manners of life are still those of Neolithic humans, we find them closely bound together by an extremely ancient clan organization, which enables them to combine their individually weak forces to enjoy life in common and to progress. Man is no exception in nature. He also subject to the great principle of mutual aid, which grants the best chances of survival to those who best support each other in the struggle for life. So, with the history of mankind in his hands, the pessimist philosopher triumphantly concludes that warfare and oppression are the very essence of human nature. Again, that's Hobbes. That the warlike and predatory instincts of humanity can only be restrained within certain limits by a strong authority, right? So that's the Leviathan we talk about, which enforces peace and thus gives an opportunity to the few and nobler ones to prepare a better life for humanity in times to come. So one of the things about the book is there's the, we're using the terms commune and communism and stuff like that, but it's also anti-hierarchy. It's saying, oh, because you thought there was this, by nature the humans are all each against all, everyone's fighting and all that, and so you need a strong authority, right? You need a hierarchy in order to stop that. One of the concepts in the book is that no, you didn't. You naturally have an instinct, so it's organic to cooperate. Right? So that countervailing forces. That's one of the assumptions. So he's going through talking about kind of Eastern Europe, I think, and Western Europe. So we got Scotland, so on and so forth, and saying that these are barbarians, that they live in clans. See if you get a good example here.
Gentlemen barbarians.
Gentlemen. So it's as to private property in the land, the village community did not and could not recognize anything of the kind, and as a rule, it did not recognize it now. The land was the common property of the tribe or of the whole stem. The village community itself owned its part of the tribal territory so long as only the tribe did not claim a redistribution of the village allotments. Private property or possession forever was as incompatible with the very principles and the religious conceptions of the village community as it was with the principles of the gens. So that a long influence of the Roman law and Christian church, which soon accepted the Roman principles, were required to accustom the barbarians to the idea of private property, saying that the barbarians were more communal, and this concept of private property started invading. I think this was interesting. Communal cultivation does not, however, imply by necessity communal consumption. Already under the clan organization, we often see that when the boats laden with fruits or fish return to the village, the food they bring in is divided among the hunts and the longhouses, inhabited by either several families or the youth, and is cooked separately at each separate hut. So one of the concepts you think people were living, this concept of individual families, what we call now a nuclear family, so on and so forth, that was foreign. There were homes that had multiple families in them. We call them longhouses. And of course, like what he's saying here, when people would go out and hunt or gather and come back, it was shared. It wasn't, oh, in my mind, I thought this was the case. Like, oh, my dad went out there and killed the deer and brought it back. That's what we're eating. And you say, no, it was communal. And I mean, that makes sense to me because, one person can get lucky, another person won't, and then one family's not eating. I think when you think about it, it seems kind of trivially true that, oh yeah, they probably were sharing things. But they're saying that it's observed here. So We've got about 5 more minutes. Let's see here. All right. Another argument he has here: to realize in full the immense work that must have been performed by the barbarian communities in order to conquer the woody and marshy wilderness which Europe was some 2,000 years ago. Isolated families having no tools and weak as they were could not have conquered it. The wilderness would have overpowered them. So he's saying the concept of a pioneer, oh, we're going to go over here and live here in this new unpopulated area by, there's no humans there. We think of that in the, Wild West here, Johnny Appleseed, wherever. Pioneers going across and settling areas that were uninhabited or just dangerous, let's say. That's not how it happened in Europe. It was this cooperation within clans and so on and so forth. And he's saying that, here we go, that the imaginary barbarian, the man who fights and kills at his mere caprice, existed no more than a bloodthirsty savage. The real barbarian was living, on the contrary, under a wide series of institutions imbued with considerations as to what may be useful or obnoxious to his tribe or confederation, and these institutions were piously handed down from generation to generation in verses and songs and proverbs, triads, sentences, and stuff. They're saying that our idea of barbarian is not, it wasn't true. With as far as in my mind, I'm thinking Conan the Barbarian, somebody with a big sword running around chopping everyone up and saying I own everything, and it's like, no, that's not how it was. And I'm translating the word barbarian, the word savage to times, just ages. And it's talking about, all right. The rest of this chapter is talking about you've got fighting and how and avoiding fighting is cooperation. So that there's degrees of that. So again, you have a concept of you're in a cave and there's someone in the next cave, they come over and steal your stuff, right? And then avoiding that somehow. So he's saying that really wasn't the case. It's more often instinctual to cooperate. Well, there's another stage of that, and he starts to say what emerges as rules, right? So he just talked about rules that are passed down, proverbs and so on and so forth. These, it starts to be where the benefit of laws, why they emerged was the benefit of mutual aid. So the instinct is this cooperation of solidarity, sociability, and because you want to be sociable, because you don't want to fight with one another and resolve things, what emerges is this kind of similar to what Hobbes is saying. It emerges, but it's laws that emerge, and then you have an arbiter, right? Not a king, but an arbiter that says, "Oh, we're observing the law this way or that way, what have you." And then on top of that, you've got obviously fighting with swords and all that, like the basic idea, fantasy or whatever. But then you have, he's going to talk about is trade and even negotiation over prices and how all that would be done. That's a conflict too. All of that is conflict. And then having the rules for that being emerging because of mutual aid, right? So all of that riding on top of the instincts. So we've got 2 more minutes here. this, I thought was it. Every stranger who enters a Kabyle village has a right to housing in the winter. That's amazing to me, like, that would be the case. And his horses can always graze on the communal lands for 24 hours. But in the case of need, he can reckon upon an almost unlimited support. Thus, during the famine of 1867-68, the Kabyles received and fed everyone who sought refuge in their villages without distinction of origin. In the district of Delhi's, no less than 12,000 people who came from all parts of Algeria and even from Morocco were fed in this way, while people died from starvation all over Algeria. There was not one single case of death due to this cause in Kabylian soil. This is an example. I mean, an economist would probably challenge this like it was a fantasy or something like that. So that kind of thing is an emerging of mutual aid. So I didn't capture it enough, but again, that idea of justice, which was, okay, someone killing another person because they stole something from you, the kind of the prototype idea of that is it's revenge. And he's saying, okay, so revenge is less cooperative than compensation. And so compensation starts to, instead of eye for an eye, it starts to seep its way in as a, let's say, reparation, right? You're repairing what you did that was wrong. So if there's a murder, there's, the concept and the idea that you would repair, it would be too expensive. It would be so expensive that you would never want to murder anyone. But you would basically owe someone for the rest of your life all these horses or all these cattle or something like that. But instead of you getting killed, you would have to repair what you did. And then that's more cooperative than the base idea of this justice based on revenge. Saying that justice based on revenge is, again, each against all, and cooperative mutual aid, you would if there's some type of instinct of mutual aid, you would predict that a more efficient or more cooperative thing would emerge, which would be this like reparation. So laws started to emerge where they were more about repairing. Any comments? Let's go ahead and wrap this up. We might need another week, or we can go on to something else. So far?
Well, I won't be